All right, I've got 10 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and kick this off, guys. So thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to the Key Training webinar by KICKER. I am Ken Bundy. We also have Aaron Malin on chat. We have John Myers, our other trainer, on chat as well, and Carlos Jimenez. They're all going to be in the chat box answering your questions. Today we're going to discuss the ins and outs of the Key Amplifier. So feel free, ask questions in chat, guys. We want to make this a two-way street. No question too silly. Don't think that, hey, I should know better or something like that. There's no question too silly. We have a lot of people attending this, anyone from general consumers to professional installers, people that have probably never heard of this piece before, people who have installed 10 million of them. So I'm going to do my best to keep everybody entertained, but feel free. Make sure you guys hit up that chat log. So I'd like to start a little bit and just say, hey, what is the Key Amplifier? What is the Key Amplifier? What makes this product special? The Key Amplifier is a small form factor 4-channel amplifier. Does 45 watts by 4 RMS. It's only about this big. So, I mean, it's smaller than a brick. Real tiny little amplifier. And you can hook this up to both factory and aftermarket head units. But the thing that really makes this amplifier shine is it has DSP built into it. What is DSP, Ken? What is DSP? DSP allows you to basically optimize the speakers and the audio in your car without you really having to do much in this case. So it's going to be time correction, it's going to be EQing, it does auto gain setting, it does all kinds of cool stuff for you. So more importantly, why do I care? Why do I care, Ken? Why do I use a Key amplifier? Well, let me ask you guys a question. How often are you doing an install in a vehicle and you can't replace that factory head unit? Or maybe you can, but the parts to do it are a little pricey. Maybe they're too cumbersome. Maybe the owner just doesn't want to switch to an aftermarket head unit. Well, you can use the Key Amplifier to optimize the signal coming out of that factory head unit and make sure that your speakers sound as best as they possibly can. But don't get me wrong, this will absolutely still work with all aftermarket head units as well. This is a very, very, very versatile piece. So I'd like to kind of kick it off today, and other than what I just said, I'm going to launch a poll to get everybody involved here. So that should be launching. So you should be seeing a poll on your screen. Just asking you guys, have you ever installed the KICKER Key Amplifier before? See what you guys have to say. We'll leave this open for just 45 seconds or so. Obviously, your options are yes, I do them all the time. The Key rocks. I did it once. I kind of heard of it. Yeah, you just said it. And then the other option is the Key who? What? What are you talking about, Ken? So we'll leave this open just another couple of seconds. So far, we've got about 3/4 of you that have answered. I can see those that haven't answered. Get involved. Got 63 of you guys online learning from me today. That's awesome. 80% have voted. A couple more seconds. All right, we'll go ahead and close our poll down at 1 minute open. So there we go. You guys should see the results. Aaron, can they see the results on the screen? It doesn't look like the results are showing. Anyway, I'll read them out to you guys. So 19% of you have said, yes, I've done the Key many times. Awesome. 22% have said, I put in one. Cool. 46% have said, I've heard of it. I just like to learn more about it. And then 13% say, what now? What's the KICKER Key? So hopefully I'll keep every one of you guys entertained today, from those that have never heard of this product before to those that have done a ton of it. So today is going to be the ins and outs of how to install the Key Amplifier in 2 very different installations. So a basic installation that already has an aftermarket radio and just 4 basic speakers in it, but how do we elevate that system with the KICKER Key? And then the second install is going to be kind of a higher end install. We're going to do what's called bi-amping the speakers, and we're dealing with a newer vehicle that has a factory amplifier. And I'll walk you through the steps of how you can integrate the Key to really elevate that system to the next step. So with that, obviously I can't do 2 Key installs in the short 45 minutes that we have together. So we do have a video to show you of the first one. I'll go ahead and kick that off, and let's get it started. What's up, everyone? This is Ken from the KICKER Tech Force. We're in the KICKER World Headquarters today. We're going to be putting in 2 KICKER Key 4-channel DSP amplifiers, so stay tuned. We're going to do one in this sweet vintage 2000 Nissan Maxima. We're going to do just a basic install in that, and then we're going to do the opposite side of the spectrum. We're going to do a 2013 Fiat 500 with factory Beats audio amplifier. So we're just trying to show you the breadth of what the Key amplifier is capable of doing. This is a really, really cool piece. It's able to optimize your either factory or aftermarket speakers for the particular cabin of car that they're installed in. Really cool piece. I'd like to show you how it works. So let's get started. So before you start your installation, you're going to want to inspect the vehicle that you're working on to see what aftermarket components might already be installed. In this particular car, we do have an aftermarket head unit that we're working with. Well, that's going to work to our advantage with the Key amplifier, as we know we already have full range, flat frequency response coming out of it. And that's not something you usually get the luxury of in a lot of factory head units. And the Key amplifier is capable of many different types of installs. It's a very flexible piece. But for this car, we're going to keep it simple. We're going to do 4-channel mode, which means we're going to just power up the 4 speaker locations, each off their individual channels, and the DSP will handle all the work from there. So these are the 2 harnesses that are included with the Key amplifier. This is your audio input harness, and this would be your audio output harness along with your power connections. So for audio in, you can either run low level or RCA connections from your aftermarket head unit directly into the Key, or you can cut these plugs off and run high level in directly into the Key. The advantage of running high level in is a stronger input signal, as well as you get the advantages of being able to use DC offset to turn your amplifier on and off. So you don't need to run the 12-volt switched ignition lead from anywhere. For this install, we're going to go ahead and use high level in. So we're going to take the head unit harness and we're going to run the high level out of that, cut these RCA off, and run high level into the amplifier. Additionally, you could opt for using the KICKER KISL, the KISL. So that's going to be RCAs that you could plug into these audio inputs, and then you're going to have speaker wire out that you could then solder on to your high level in. Now we have the audio input harness to the Key complete. We have the aftermarket head unit harness on one side with the power wires for it, and then we have the audio input wires into the Key amplifier on the other side. Additionally, I've gone ahead and wired up the output speaker wires from the Key directly to the head unit harness, so those run out to the speakers in the car. So all that's left on this harness is the power, ground, and the remote turn on. So like I said earlier, we're going to use DC offset to control this amplifier to turn it on and off. With most KICKER amplifiers, including the KICKER Key amplifier, whenever you use DC offset to control the amplifier on and off, your 12-volt remote turn-on input becomes an output. So you can use this to trigger on maybe a subwoofer amplifier, to trip relays, or to do anything you want, really. However, if you're not going to turn on another amplifier, you need to make sure you cap off this wire or tape it off, so of course it doesn't short to something in the dash. But coincidentally, in this vehicle, we do have an aftermarket subwoofer amplifier. So just for fun, we're going to use the remote turn-on output of the Key amplifier to run to our remote turn-on of the subwoofer amplifier in the back. As far as the power and ground wires, we've already ran those directly from the battery. This wire here runs directly through the firewall into the battery of the car, and there is a 15 amp fuse within 18 inches of the battery. The ground runs directly to the chassis of the vehicle, and that's best practices to make sure you don't have any induced noise problems or anything like that. So we'll go ahead and we'll connect the remote turn-on, the power wires up, and we'll be rocking and rolling. Let's go over these dip switches in detail so we can kind of familiarize ourselves with the Key amplifier. The first dip switch all the way here on the left, that's going to be your turn-on selection switch. So you can leave it in the 12-volt position, so it will require a 12-volt remote turn-on wire connection just like any other amplifier would. But as we discussed earlier, we're going to use the DC offset in the aftermarket head unit to turn on the amplifier. So we need to make sure that we flip that dip switch to the DC position. The second dip switch over is going to be fader. With the fader set to the off position, you're going to get 4 channels of audio output with only 2 channels of audio input. So it's up to you. If you want the traditional fader capability, then you're going to leave the fader on, and then it's going to require 4 channels of audio in order to get 4 channels out. The third dip switch over is going to be the compression dip switch. The compression dip switch limits distortion out of the key amplifier to about 1% THD, which is right at rated power. So no matter how high you turn up the gain or how high you turn up the volume knob, at some point it's just going to cap out and not get any louder, so it doesn't output any more distortion. If you kind of want to bulletproof your install and make sure that you don't cause damage to your speakers, that's a great way to do it. The fourth dip switch over is going to be biamp mode. Biamping allows you to not use passive crossovers on a component set. So you can hook the tweeters of your component set directly to the front channels of the key, the woofers of the component set to the rear channels of the key. You get all the power from the key amplifier on the front stage, and you let the DSP built into the key amplifier handle all your crossover work. It does have to be in that order. The tweeters do need to be on the front, the woofers have to be on the rear channels of the key. It will not work the other way around, just a heads up on that. The next dip switch over is going to be the KICKER EQ selection switch. With the KICKER EQ set to enable, it's going to give you a subtle bass and treble bump, just to add some excitement into the final result of the key's turnout. If you don't like it, that's fine. You can flip it to defeat and you'll just be left with a flat response. Next dip switch over is going to be time delay defeat switch. This is important. If you're installing the key amplifier on a factory head unit that has time correction from the factory, the key cannot measure that. The key is going to stack additional time correction on top of that and kind of screw up your soundstage. So if you ever run the auto setup process and your soundstage doesn't really sound all that great, that may be what's going on, is you had some factory time correction built in from the factory head unit or that factory amplifier. So you can flip that time delay to defeat. It'll defeat the time correction portion of the setup process in the key, but leave you with the time correction, right from the factory. Both of those dip switches, the KICKER EQ or that time delay defeat, you can flip those dip switches as many times as you want. You do not need to run the auto setup process every single time you flip a switch. So you can run auto setup, try it in both positions, see whichever you like personally best, leave it there. The last two dip switches, those are going to be your high pass filter options. So if you do want to filter out some deep bass to your door speakers, you can do that with those last two dip switches. And then of course we have the independent gain knobs for amp 1 and amp 2. Make sure you set those properly. And then we have this little mysterious button right here, radio detect. What that is dummy loads. So once you enable that radio detect feature, it's going to place a 60 ohm load on the input side of this amplifier onto whatever head unit you have connected. We'll go into further detail with that with the second key install. So now we have the amplifier completely installed. It's stashed in a cavity behind the aftermarket head unit that we have here. Next thing you want to do, of course, is just check to make sure that you actually have sound out of all 4 speaker locations, which we've already verified that we do. And now it's time to do the auto setup process. So this is where the key works its magic. It does come with a microphone, an included microphone that you can plug directly into the amplifier. You're going to want to run that wire up and then mount the microphone just on the headrest with the mic positioned directly to the sky. The rubber strap is there just to help you keep that microphone in place. The button that does all the magic is in line on the microphone wire. So this is the button that's going to start the auto setup process. But the signal you need to play through your source unit is called pink noise. If you don't know what pink noise is, it's equal amplitude at every frequency throughout the range of human hearing, from 20 Hertz all the way to 20 kilohertz. If you don't have a source of that, you can download that for free on kicker.com under the support tab. So go ahead and download that, save that to a USB flash drive or to a CD or something along those lines. Right now I have it saved on my phone and we're using aux-in. Do not stream pink noise via Bluetooth due to compression, but we have it via aux-in now. So then you're going to go ahead, you're going to turn that pink noise up to a reasonable high level, push the button one time to start the auto setup process. You'll start to hear a series of beeps. Once you hear those beeps, you'll have 10 seconds to exit the vehicle. You want to make sure that the engine's off, the air conditioning's off, all the windows are rolled up and you're in a quiet environment during the auto setup process. The auto setup process will take about 5 to 8 minutes depending on how much work it really has to do. Also, one thing you want to check is you want to make sure all your bass boost, your treble, any of the EQ functions that are built into your source unit, whether it's aftermarket or factory, are all set to flat. So you're going to start with a flat signal. Of course, once it goes through the speaker wires in the car and plays out of the speakers, it's not going to be flat anymore in the cabin. So that's what the goal of the auto setup process is. It's going to flatten out the signal so the response at the listener's ear is flat. Then it's going to set time correction and make sure that sound stage is high and centered for you on the dash. So let's go ahead and get started. So now if you've heard the happy tones after the auto setup process, the shave and a haircut tones, the auto setup process completed successfully. If you do hear the failure tones, you need to count the number of beeps after those tones and then reference that against the owner's manual to figure out what went wrong. But more than likely it did complete successfully and it probably sounds great. From there, the switch that you use to start the auto setup process becomes an AB switch. It's a demo switch. So you can turn the DSP built into the amplifier on and off with this switch. So one low beep, like that, means that the DSP is now off. Two beeps like that means the DSP is on. So you can play whatever your favorite track is. Go ahead and toggle the DSP back and forth so you can hear all the changes that the auto setup process made. Really, really, really cool feature that's built in from that. So from there, you just need to unplug the microphone from the amplifier, snap in that last dash panel, and you're all set. That's it. Make sure you turn the DSP on, and before you do that, of course. And one of the last things I wanted to mention about the Key amplifier, it is completely compatible with start-stop vehicles. So those vehicles where the motor dies when you roll up to a red light or a stop sign, and then when you let your foot off the brake, the motor recranks so you can drive away. During that recrank time, voltage tends to sag. Most amplifiers do not like that. The Key amplifier is completely compatible with that. It has no problems. So if you have a start-stop vehicle that needs a 4-channel amp install, the Key amplifier is the good-to-go one on that. So that's it. Let's move on to the second vehicle. All right, and we're back.
Yes.
All right, we're back. So there, you guys saw how easy it was to install the Key amplifier with an aftermarket head unit, but the same situation will work with a basic factory radio as well. So then the next video, we're actually going to kick it up a notch. Like I said, we're going to do a factory head unit with a factory amplifier as well. Before we get into that, I did want to kind of make sure everybody's on the same page here. So this is the setup that we just ran in that last video you saw, a simple 4-channel mode. So we had our aftermarket head unit and our 4 speakers. So the Key amplifier integration from that, Key amplifier just slid in line. So the outputs of that factory head unit now run into the Key, and the output of the Key out to four speakers, each in the normal 4 locations around the car. But we know most vehicles, they typically have more speakers than that in the car. Most often, you'll have speakers in the A-pillar, maybe a tweeter in the A-pillar. Maybe you'll have some 3-inch speakers up in the dash. Maybe some tweeters in the top of the door panels, you know, kind of almost 2 foot away from the woofers in the door. So how do we power all those speakers, or how do we really deal with the separation between the 2 speakers that are up on the front stage of the car? So we can do what's called biamp mode. And I'll show you guys a wiring diagram of what that would look like. So you may be thinking, wow, that is a lot of lines, Ken. Can't follow that. Let me walk you through it. It's super simple. So the front channels, the white and gray that you're looking at, run out of the head unit and into the Key amplifier. The rear channels, the green and purple, still run directly to those rear speakers. So the rear speakers are powered off the factory or aftermarket head unit. The front channels of the Key, the front channels out of the head unit will run into the Key amplifier, and then you can see that the front outputs from the Key amplifier then get bumped over to those front tweeters, and the rear channels from the Key amplifier then run to those front woofers. You have the tweeters on the front channels, woofers on the rear channels. Notice what you don't see with that component set up front. Crossover boxes. That's right. You don't need the passive crossover box with the Key amplifier. Get you guys full screen again. So this is a typical component set. This is an aftermarket component set, but the factory one's roughly similar idea. So you get your woofer, you get your tweeter, you get this crossover box, which you have input signal that comes in, and then you got just the woofer frequencies out of one set of wires and the tweeter frequencies out of the other set of wires. With the Key amplifier, you can take that, you can put that back in the cart and slip that up into the closet. You're not going to use that ever again. You can hook the speakers themselves, the tweeter itself, directly into the amplifier, and you let the digital signal processing that the Key can do set the crossover for you. It's able to determine if that's maybe a 1-inch tweeter. I'll set the crossover at this distance, at this frequency. Oh, I have a 3-inch dash speaker connected to the front channels on the Key. No problem. It will automatically adjust the crossover and set it a little bit lower so you can get some more vocals out of that front stage up on the dash. The Key is capable of doing a lot of different cool things. So with that said, let's go ahead and kick it into our second and final video, which is going to be the factory head unit with the factory amplifier integration. What's up, everyone? This is Ken from the KICKER Tech Force. We're in the KICKER World Headquarters today. We're going to be putting in 2 KICKER Key 4-channel DSP amplifiers, so stay tuned. We're going to do one in this sweet vintage 2000 Nissan Maxima. Sorry about that, guys. Let me get the other one going. So now we're going to move on to this 2013 Fiat 500. It is a little bit older Fiat, but it does come equipped with that factory Beats audio system. So though with the Maxima we did kind of a simple install with just the amplifier, the key amplifier, and that basic 4-channel mode, we're going to kick it up a notch with the Fiat. We're going to use the amplifier in what's called bi-amp mode, which means we're going to put those factory tweeters that are on the A-pillar, we're going to put those on amp 1 of the key amplifier, and then the woofers that are in the front doors we're going to put on amp 2 of the key amplifier. So we're going to use all the power of the key amplifier on the front stage of the vehicle, and we're going to run the rears off the factory amplifier. We're going to use the DSP built into the key amplifier to handle all the crossover work for those tweeters and woofers on the front stage. So we got to integrate with that Beats amplifier, and we're going to walk you through that. Let's get started. So anytime you're going to reuse a factory head unit and or amplifier, there's 3 things that you need to be concerned about. Number 1 is where are you going to tap into signal and what that signal looks like. So is it full range? Do we have all the bass and treble present, and what are the relationship between the two? Is there an abundance of bass, is there a lack of bass, etc. The second thing you need to worry about is dynamic EQ. So that EQ curve, does it change if you raise volume up and down? And then the third thing is dummy loads. So with many factory amplifiers, they're looking for a very specific resistance on their speaker loads. When they see something outside of their comfort zone, they mute the output or go into protection. So you'll need to simulate a load to kind of trick that amplifier into seeing the load that it needs, so it will continue passing audio for your purposes. So in the Fiat 500 with the Beats audio system, the amplifier is actually in the trunk. So we're going to head back there and we'll take it from there. Now that we have the Beats audio amplifier down, you can access the wires a lot easier. The first thing you want to do with any factory amplifier is identify which wire is which are inputs, which are outputs, which set of speaker wires run to which speaker. There is a ton of online resources, some are pay, some are free. If you don't have access to any of those that you can look up your wire colors at, you do need to use a tone generator. So a tone generator is going to send a sine wave or an AC signal out these speaker wires to whichever speaker wire pair that you have connected to. From there, of course, it'll play through the speaker in the car, and you're able to tell that, hey, that's an amp output, front left speaker, etc. The important thing I wanted to note here is do not use a 9-volt battery for this purpose. Do not connect a 9-volt battery to any set of wires that you're unsure of if they're going to be a speaker wire or not, because you can damage some wires in the car very, very easily with a 9-volt DC signal. This sends an AC signal, a sine wave down it, and you can adjust the frequency to play, whether it's a factory subwoofer, factory tweeter. You can identify it by using a real tone generator. So once you've identified some speaker wires, you're going to need to know what the frequency range is that's present out of that amplifier and on those speaker wires. For that, you're going to need a tool here called an RTA, or a real-time analyzer. This is able to show you a visual representation of the frequency range that is present on those speaker wires. And for that, we actually have a probe set up that we've kind of homemade here at KICKER. We do have a walkthrough for that. It's available on kicker.com. And you can make yourself an RTA setup for like 40 bucks. So no excuse for nobody to not have an RTA in their bay. For the input signal into the RTA, you're going to want to use pink noise. So you're going to play pink noise through your factory source unit, and then it'll obviously come through the amplifier, and then you can connect up your RTA to it. If you do not have a source of pink noise, that is also available on kicker.com under the resources tab. It's a free download. So let me probe some wires here, and just as a heads up, we did do our research on it. We do know that this is an amp output wire, so I'm going to probe into that and show you guys the result. So right there you guys can see that this is not full range. This has some mid-range, but mainly it's basically high-end or high-frequency stuff. This is not what you'd want to use as the input signal to the key amplifier, or really any amplifier for that matter. So this is not a signal you want to use. Conversely, the pins right here next to it, we've done our due diligence, and we know that this is actually the output of the factory head unit. Ah, that's more like it. So now you can see that
We have all the bass, all the mid-range, and all the treble there present, and more or less flat frequency response. But here's the next part. Point 2 that I alluded to before is, does that curve change with the volume setting on the radio? So if we go ahead and turn the volume on the radio up, you can see the curve did move up, but it did move up in a linear fashion, meaning that the bass did not begin to roll off as volume increased. So this is absolutely the perfect example of the best signal into the key amplifier. So now we have all our connections made. On this harness here, we have our factory power and ground, which we've actually connected right into. The factory power and ground used to supply the Beats amplifier. Now that we're handling the majority of the amplification, we felt comfortable enough hooking the super efficient key amplifier up to those factory power and ground. It is obviously fused from the factory. We did put the included fuse with the key in line as well. And then we have also the audio input wires. So these are going to be directly from the head unit. These are the speaker wires that we showed you on the RTA that were flat directly from the head unit. Those are going to be the audio in wires for the key amplifier. Note that there's only 2 of them. There's only front left and front right. Since we're bi-amping the front speakers, you only need to run front channel in, and then we can use the fader dip switch on the key, which I'll show you here in a second, to give you 4-channel out. On the output side, we hook up to these factory wires. These are going to be the tweeter output wires, which we're going to run into the front or amp 1 of the key amplifier. These were going to be the door woofer wires, factory door woofer wires, which we're going to run into the rear or amp 2 of the key amplifier. So the outputs of those key amplifiers are now connected directly to those factory speakers. From there, these harnesses will run over to where the key is going to be mounted, which for this install, we decided to mount it right here on the back wall. So we went ahead and extended those harnesses. We have the key input harness here, and we have the output harness for the key here. So this is going to be power and ground, of course, and then all your speaker outputs. So it's going to be much easier to set the dip switches on the key amplifier with it out of the vehicle before you actually install it. So let's set it up for the Fiat. First dip switch all the way on the left is your turn on selection. Like I discussed before, we are going to use DC offset to control our amplifier. So you do need to make sure that that first dip switch is in the DC offset position. So there we go. The next dip switch, that's the fader dip switch. So with that, you can use 2 channels of audio input to get 4 channels of audio output. Since we are bi-amping in this car, we're just using the front left and front right input channels, but of course we do need audio out of all 4 channels. So we're going to go ahead and turn the fader to the off position. Fader is not necessary. So we are in the off position now. The third dip switch over is the compression dip switch, just like with the Maxima. So what that does is it limits distortion out of the amplifier to about 1% THD, which is right at rated power. So it kind of bulletproofs the install in regards to not letting you output distortion. If you want to move on from that, the next one is bi-amp mode. So of course, if we're bi-amping and we only want tweeters on the front channels and the woofers on the rear, you're going to have to flip that dip switch to bi-amp mode on. And that lets that DSP really stretch its legs. So bi-amp mode is on. The next dip switch is going to be the KICKER EQ dip switch. So just like with the Maxima, that's going to add a subtle bass and treble bump to the output of the key amplifier. If you personally don't like it, feel free to defeat it. We're going to go ahead and leave it on for now. The next dip switch is going to be time delay defeat. If we're installing this head unit, or excuse me, if we're installing this key amplifier on a factory head unit that has time correction, you would have to defeat the time correction in the key amplifier so it doesn't mess everything up. We are not entirely sure if this Beats system has time correction from the factory. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and install it with the time correction enabled. And if the auto setup process, the soundstage is pulled way to one side, we know that we're probably dealing with factory time correction. We can go ahead and defeat time correction on this key amplifier and see what that leaves us. And then the last 2 dip switches are going to be your high pass filter. So if we have a subwoofer in the car, you can go ahead and filter out deep bass from those door speakers. We do have a factory subwoofer in this car, so I'll probably go ahead and set it to 60 Hertz, which would be this first dip switch down. Then from there we have gains to adjust, so depending on input signal you can go ahead and adjust the gains upward or downward from there. And then this last switch right here, radio detect. That's the dummy loads that we discussed previously. So if that factory amplifier is going to require dummy loads, this button would need to be pushed in. The best way to learn that is actually go ahead and install it, and if you go ahead and turn it on and all of a sudden the head unit is just not outputting anything or it seems like it's muted, you probably do need those dummy loads. So you can go back to the amplifier, push the radio detect button in, and then give it another shot. Now we have the key amplifier installed in the back of the vehicle. We took the included microphone, we plugged it into the in panel, we actually ran the microphone end all the way up to the driver's headrest. We used the included rubber strap to help keep the microphone in place. We have learned from experience, typically, especially if you're bi-amping, that facing the microphone forward tends to give better results, but it is encouraged. You can try it in a couple of different positions and find what works best in your particular car with your particular speakers. In line, the microphone wire, we have this button. This button is what kicks off the auto setup process in the Key amplifier. It's what's going to handle our crossovers, our auto EQ, our time correction, everything for us. So you're going to need to play a source of pink noise through your factory radio to give the Key the signal that it needs to do the auto setup process. If you don't have a source of pink noise saved on a CD or a USB flash drive, you can download it for free from kicker.com. So before you start, you need to make sure that your factory head unit is set up. So what that means is put bass at 0, treble at 0, turn off any speed compensation, any EQing type functions, you want to make sure they're all set to flat. And then from there, you want to make sure that any speakers that are not connected to the Key amplifier are turned off or they remain quiet during the auto setup process. So since we're bi-amping the front stage of this vehicle, we went ahead and we faded the audio all the way forward so the back speakers remain quiet. From there, the factory subwoofer actually still plays. So we pop that sub panel off, we unplug that harness to keep the subwoofer quiet during the auto setup process. Of course, once the auto setup process is complete, you can fade back to personal taste, however much rear feel you'd like, and then you can plug the subwoofer back in, of course, and get all the bass back. So let's go ahead and get started. You want to make sure that you close all the windows and the sunroof before you start the auto setup process. Then you'll get 10 seconds after you press the button. So that's it. The auto setup process is complete, and let me tell you, this thing rocks. Some cool quick points I wanted to point out about the Key amplifier. That button that was inline the microphone wire, after the auto setup process is completed, that button then turns into a before and after button, or an AB button. It turns the DSP in the amplifier on and off so you can demo it. You can put your favorite song in the source unit and then sit there and turn the DSP on, off, so you can hear all the changes that the setup process made. You can do that an infinite number of times, and then of course, whenever you're done listening, when you're done demoing, you can turn DSP on, unplug the microphone from the amplifier, and you're all set. One other thing I wanted to point out, since we did do a bi-amp mode in this Fiat, the front speakers and rear speakers are on separate amplifiers inside the Key. They're on amp 1 and amp 2 respectively. So you can adjust, if maybe the woofers are overpowering the tweeters, you can adjust the gains independently as well. Only adjust down, of course, but you can help dial in the relationship between those front tweeters and front door woofers a little bit if one's too loud versus the other. A really cool feature of the bi-amp mode capability in the Key, the setup process is actually able to recognize the difference between maybe a 1-inch tweeter and a 3 or 3.5-inch dash speaker. So if it detects that it's a larger speaker, it will automatically set the crossover a little bit lower and get you more vocals out of those dash speakers and really help out that front stage. It does it all automatically. You don't need to know how to tune anything. It just works its magic. One thing I did want to mention, we talked about dummy loads previously. On some of the brand new factory amplifiers, you do have to watch out for that, and like I said before, you do have to, really the best way is to just go ahead and install the Key amplifier or any amplifier you're working on, and then go ahead and see if that factory audio mutes when you set everything up. In this car, it's a 2013 Fiat 500, it wasn't necessary. If it was, you would go ahead and press that button on the side of the Key amplifier, radio detect, and that'll, sometimes you have to cycle the power on the head unit, and you'll be back in action. That option is built into the Key amplifier as well as the black and red KXA line of amplifiers. So though this thing rocks now, the next step, the next upgrade path, you can replace the door speakers. They are all currently factory, so if you wanted to pop in some brand new KICKER speakers, maybe a KICKER component set in the front stage, you could certainly do that. And then you're going to want to retune the Key amplifier accordingly. So install the speakers, plug the microphone back in, delete the results that the DSP had for this setup, and then go ahead and let it rerun its auto setup process again and really dial in for the brand new speakers. And then of course, let's say you wanted to take that even further and add a much larger amplifier behind it. You can use the Key amplifier as a preamp. So you can run the outputs of the Key amplifier directly into the inputs of any KICKER amplifier, so you can get a lot more power out to all of those speakers, but you still get all the DSP auto setup benefits of the Key amplifier. So that's it. That wraps us up for today, and thanks for joining us.
All right, we're back from that. So there you guys saw how you can use the key amplifier in a really completely different way to amp up, I say that, no pun intended, amp up a factory amplified system. So you can add some DSP to that factory amplifier as long as you can find a full range signal that stays relatively flat through 20 hertz all the way to 20 kilohertz, even though you change the volume up and down. If you got that type of signal either before or after the factory amplifier, run that into the key and you're golden. You can connect whatever you want from on the output side of that. So on the next point I wanted to make, we already discussed the biamp mode extensively, so I will go ahead and show you the next feature I wanted to talk about is the limiter LEDs on the end panel of the amp. So the limiter LEDs will light up yellow when the key amplifier is maxed out. So when you're asking for more than the key amplifier can give you, there's a limiter that kind of rails it back and gives you the most possible output that the key can give without going into crazy distortion. So there's actually two stages to this. It's a two-stage limiter compressor that we have built into the key. There is one that is very gentle, we'll say. It just basically limits you from just outputting straight square waves. So that doesn't help anybody, right? If you've got volume in cranked to maximum, you've got the gains pegged at 11, you're going to have a bad time. So the key amplifier can keep you from getting into, outer galaxy type distortion. If you flip the compressor dip switch, however, you'll engage that compressor, it'll become a little bit more aggressive, and you'll start to limit output. You'll limit distortion to around 1%, which is still where rated power is. Like all KICKER amplifiers, they are CEA 2006 rated, which means that the power output we say is true at 1% distortion. So you'll still get full power out of the amplifier with the compressor engaged, but you'll limit distortion out drastically. So if you're whichever orientation you'd rather have it in, that's fine. But when the yellow LEDs light up, you're limiting the output of the key, and it's throttling back on purpose. And it does this dynamically depending on how high you have the volume, depending on maybe what style of music you're playing, that type of thing. So if you got the limiter LEDs lighting up, you're probably kind of maxing out what the key is capable of doing. Make sure you tune the gain knobs back a touch. So that is the limiter LEDs. There we go. Next thing I wanted to talk about is going to be what happens when things go wrong. What happens if you run the auto setup process and it fails? It does not complete properly. So if you don't hear the happy tones, instead you'll hear some sad tones. It's kind of like you, I don't know, died in a video game or something along those lines. It's actually very, very obvious. So following those unhappy tones, you'll hear a series of beeps. So you'll have to count the number of beeps, and then you can reference that versus the owner's manual. For example, you hear the unhappy tone followed by 6 beeps. You can pull up the owner's manual. 6 beeps is probably the most common one that we generally hear, and what that is the environment was not quiet enough and it knew that it couldn't complete the auto setup process properly, especially if you're going to be biamping. If you are going to be biamping, you have to really, really make sure that the vehicle is in a quiet environment. So if it fails and you hear 6 beeps, try it again. Turn off everything that's in the room, maybe take the vehicle out into a distant parking lot or whatever it takes to make sure that it's in a quiet enough environment that it can execute the biamp mode and it can get past the ambient noise check. So make sure that whatever number of beeps you hear, reference that versus the owner's manual and you figure out exactly what's going on. So hopefully you'll have success and try it again. If you feel you miscounted the number of beeps or maybe you weren't paying attention, didn't really know what was going on, it will repeat. So you'll hear the unhappy tone, number of beeps, there will be a pause of nothing, but if you just don't touch the key amplifier, it will then play the unhappy tone again, followed by the number of beeps, and it will continue to do that to make sure that you heard it, and from there you can figure out what's going on. Mic placement. So in the owner's manual, we do say that the mic placement goes on the driver's headrest, facing as vertical as possible, so facing towards the headliner. We have found that helps prevent maybe beaming right from tweeters directly into it. It helps kind of prevents the tweeters from being dialed back or maybe getting real bright or anything crazy like that. However, from personal experience, because I've installed 100 of them or so personally, we have found there are some vehicles where maybe orienting the microphone a little bit differently gives you better results. Again, especially if you're biamping. If you're biamping, for whatever reason, we found if you actually aim the microphone facing the windshield, facing forward, you get a little bit better results on that. So this is things that are going to be different depending on what vehicle you're in, so what the cabin is shaped like, what type of speakers are installed, if it's tweeters in the A-pillars, tweeters in the doors, etc., things like that. So there's a lot of different variables, so that's why changing the mic orientation can sometimes really help you and really give you a better result. An example that Aaron likes to tell is we had, I believe it was an older Mustang with a glass sunroof. So the microphone facing the headliner was actually into a glass sunroof. So it made the tweeters actually scream because they were getting a ton of reflection off the glass sunroof. So simply closing the sunshade helped quite a bit, of course. And then from there, I think he even maybe threw a piece of fabric or something over the microphone to kind of dial it in and get it tricked the way it needs to be. But don't get me wrong, the vast majority of times, it's going to be a one and done setup. For the 2 installs that we did here, it was a one and done setup. I put the microphone on the driver's headrest, I hit the go button. It took between 5 and 8 minutes, and we were rocking and rolling after that. So just like I said in the video, after the auto setup process is complete, that setup button that you use to kick off the setup process becomes a before and after button. So it's a demo button that lets you see what the setup process did. It turns the DSP and the amp on and off, and you can toggle that back and forth as many times as you want. Many times as you want. Play your favorite song, toggle back and forth, play 3 or 4 songs if you want, toggle back and forth. And if you're unhappy with the results that it did, how do you delete the results that are in there so you can then try again? Well, you actually press and hold that setup button for 10 seconds. And I'll tell you, that 10 seconds feels like an eternity when you're doing, oh, it's not working. Trust me, it's 10 full seconds. So hold the setup button for 10 seconds. You'll hear a long tone. That means that the results are now deleted out. And then the next time you press that auto setup button, it'll kick off a new setup process, and you can try again with the mic in a different orientation or whatever you want to do. So I guess that about wraps it up. If you guys have any other questions about the Key amplifier, please, we're going to stay online. We're going to chat with you. But I did want to get one more poll in and ask you guys some questions here. So if anybody could, if you're near a keyboard, we go ahead and launch this poll for you guys. Do you feel like you've learned anything from this webinar? Have you taken away some stuff? Heck yes, I have. This was awesome. Quite a bit. Yeah, it was good. Yeah, a little bit. Or nope. Wasting your time, Ken. I didn't learn anything. I was already an expert on it. Maybe. All right, so it looks like we've got about 70% so far have answered. I'll give you guys a few more seconds here. %82 have answered. I like to see those high percentages of you guys answering. That makes me feel good that they're actually still paying attention to the keyboard. You didn't just log in and let it play in the background. Cool. Five more seconds here. 85% of you guys have voted so far. All right, and this poll is closed. So if you guys can see those responses there, as a whole, the vast majority of you guys have learned a lot. Awesome. That makes me feel great. So please, though, if you have any further questions on it, some things that maybe we didn't get into in the videos or I haven't done here in person, by all means, we're going to keep all of our tech support team on the chat log even after the webinar ends, after the broadcast ends. So feel free to stay online, ask questions, do whatever you need to do, and we'll get you the answers that need to happen. If you come up with a question later, feel free to email any of the email addresses you see for the participants of the staff members here. Additionally, obviously, we have a tech support line, so you can call Kicker Tech, and they'll get you pointed in the right direction as well. And then I know a lot of you guys are thinking, wow, the Key is really cool. What's the future look like for Key? Well, I can't spoil any surprises for you, but I will tell you guys the Key line will be expanding in 2020. So if you like the Key, think it's a very cool piece, just wait till 2020 comes out. We got some cool stuff, so make sure you guys keep your eyes open. And then very last thing I wanted to do is after the webinar, you guys will be emailed a survey. It's really, really quick. It should take most of you guys no more than 30 seconds, not even exaggerating, like a true 30 seconds. If you could please just do that survey. We actually go through each and every response so we can get feedback. If there's any future videos that you'd like to see, any future webinars, any subject matter that you would like to be covered, please hit us up. We want to know. So give us ideas of what you want to see, and we'll make it happen. So cool. Thanks for joining us, guys.